Okay. Once again, thanks for meeting on here. I actually feel fine. I just don't sound very good and I'm still coughing all over the place. So I didn't have any other face-to-face meetings, so I figured why be on campus if it was just for a single face-to-face class, why risk it? So in any case, I appreciate it. So let's look at what we had for homework today. Let's see, am I recording? I'm sharing, I'm recording. Okay, yep. So today's homework was make the rooms and enemies know about where they are on the map, just like we did for the players. Okay, got it. So last time, just to review what we did, we taught our players, and we go into our code here in Visual Studio, we taught players how to become aware of the current room they're in. How did we pull this off? Well, what we did is, I'll go back to our room prefab. So here's our room prefab. Remember, we have this room trigger that we turned the mesh renderer off for. We turn that mesh renderer back on. We come back out here. Now all of our rooms have this giant trigger box that even prevents my cheating flying ninja move thing that I do. All right, so what we did is we have this box that we're using as a trigger so that whenever a player goes into a room, and for today's homework, whenever an enemy crosses into a room, and we already wrote the if statement for that, this box is triggered. So now coming back here to room, but since we don't want to have our game run with these giant white boxes, just not allowing us to see what's going on, what we did is we went to that room trigger, which is just a cube with a box collider on it. We just turned off the renderer so we wouldn't see it. It's still there, we just can't see it. All right, and important piece here is the box collider is set up as a trigger. That way physics don't occur from it, but we do get programmatic notification when something happens. And remember, this guy is running this room trigger script. So every one of our room prefabs, our map is made up of these rooms. Every one of these guys has our room trigger script, which is in here. Let's see, room trigger script. And we have this code right here called on trigger enter. So this code will get automatically called every single time something with a collider enters into that trigger. And we just asked a couple questions. We said, if it's a player, let's do one thing. If it's an enemy, let's do something else. So today's homework was to deal with the enemy portion of this. But just to remind us, what did we do with the player portion? As we noticed, if it's a player, we want to take the room that's associated with this trigger script. So when this trigger script first came into existence, we instantiated a room, a blank room object. Now remember, a room object is not a mono behavior. This is a plain Jane C# object that's just keeping track of some information for us. In this case, a room holds a player, potentially. Initially, a player is not in the room, so it's null. But we did give the ability to set the player for a room, so we can give the room a player and set that. And then we also have that player set their room to the room that they're in. So this is the two-way street. A room becomes aware of the player right here, and then that player becomes aware of this room right here. And that is in our player object right here. Player, similar to room. This guy is not a mono behavior, just a plain Jane C# object who knows about his name, who knows about his kill count, and he also now knows about his current room. Initially, he's not in a room, but he has the ability to have his room set to some room, and we set it to cur room. The place where that initially happens is inside of our room CS. So when we set a player for a room, that room also lets that player know about their existence. Okay. And all that happens when we enter a trigger, we notice it's a player, the room associated with this trigger sets that player, and then we just print out to the screen, player is now in the room. All right, so that's how we did this for a player. So now what we want to do this is for our enemy. So anything that's an enemy, we want to keep track of what room they're in as well. All right, so a couple of things we need to do here. First of all, we probably need a governing class to handle enemies, just like we had a governing class for handling players and for handling rooms. We need something for handling enemies, and this guy is going to be probably pretty similar to our player class. So let's go ahead and create that. I like to always create those classes through Unity. It's not really a requirement, just I'm always paranoid that Unity will lose link to something. So I just go in and I originally create the script. I'm going to call this guy enemy. And it's initially going to make this just like it's a mono behavior script. And then I'm going to doctor it from there. So I'll just double click it. It opens it up in here. So here's my class enemy. I'm going to take off that mono behavior and I'll just dump the couple of methods in there. Now this guy's a plain Jane enemy, but I got all my imports that I might need. And if there's something weird that Unity does to make sure this script gets linked to the project, it just happened. All right, so among other things, at the very least, we want enemies to be aware of the room that they're going to be in. So we're going to have a private room. Maybe we call it current room for player. We'll have our constructor for enemy. So when we first create an enemy, we're not going to give it a name or anything at this point. So no argument constructor, and all this guy will do is set the current room equal to nothing because the enemy is initially not in a room. We do want enemies to be able to become aware of what room they're in. So we're going to have a public void set room. This guy will take in a room R as a parameter, and we'll say this dot current room is equal to R. Okay, so an enemy holds on to a current room, simple constructor, and has the ability to have their room set. That's all we're going to say an enemy is right now. Okay, now we have to decide, well, who is an enemy? Let's go back to Unity. Who needs this code behind to govern them? So I'm going to go back to my scene here. Look from above. Where's my enemy guy? There's my enemy guy. All right, so my enemy guy has our box script associated with them. All right, and remember, we told our box script about the player. Just to bring up an error some people were getting. If your code base still has the code that we wrote several classes ago, where we were having it spawn like 100 enemies, and you're getting an error message that says the player is not set, it's not for this guy. This guy, we see we have our player set, but if after runtime we spawn 100 more enemies, or I think we had it over here or something like that, none of those enemies actually have the player set for it. That's why you're getting that error. So maybe just disable your spawning those new enemies for now, so you're not getting that error. Otherwise, we'd have to set it in the, actually, we probably would have to write the code so that when something is spawned and it starts, it would grab the player from core, from the singleton. That's probably how we'd have to set it, since we wouldn't have the opportunity to drag player in like we did here. But in any case, the governing script for our enemy is called box script. Incredibly great naming convention there. So we want to go into box script and make sure that we create an instance of enemy for every one of our enemies. So we'll go to our box script. All right, so now that we know about enemies, and remember this guy has our nav mesh agent and all that stuff in there, so that's why he constantly chases our player. So I'm going to say private enemy. I'll call this guy the enemy for maybe no good reason, but whatever. So when this guy first starts, we'll just create an instance of enemy. So that means anything that has a box script associated with it will have an instance of the enemy also associated with it, so that we can set things about that enemy, for example, so that this guy can maybe know what room he's part of. Okay. So now that anything that is an enemy, anything that has a box script, has the enemy, an instance of enemy. Let's go back to Unity here and just remind ourselves that we have enemies. We do have them tagged as enemy up here in the upper right. All right, so that way inside of our room trigger on the on trigger enter, we're able to differentiate who triggered me. Was it player or was it enemy? So in this case, if it's enemy, what do we want to do? Well, we want to set the enemy for this room. Well, right now, a room only knows how to hold players. So we're going to go ahead and and for right now, we'll just do a single enemy. But, you know, as the game goes on, we might want to have multiple enemies in a room. But we'll just say there is a single enemy. So initially, that enemy is null. So a room does not have a player, does not have an enemy in it. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a public function. Enemy E. And what we want to do is we want to set this dot the enemy equal to E. And then we're going to go ahead and do just like we did for the player. An enemy needs to be able to have his room set. We wrote that code here just a few minutes ago inside of enemy. So an enemy has a public method called set room that we can pass an instance of room to, and then enemy will set his room. So for set enemy, we'll set this dot the enemy equal to E. Then we're going to say this dot the enemy dot set room to this particular instance of room. So now an enemy knows about the room that they just wandered into. And this all happens from our room trigger script. So this code we just wrote is inside of room. So every instance of room has a set enemy function now. So inside of our room trigger script, we can now say this room dot set enemy to, now we need to say, how do we get the enemy? Who knew about the player before? The player was known about from core, our singleton. So now we need to say, well, how do we find out about this this enemy? We're going to go ahead and do it through a singleton as well. Although we could do it some other ways. We could use this collider to get his governing object and then ask that object for a script and then ask that script for his instance of enemy. But that seems like a whole lot of extra work when we can just go out here. Get the error out of here for a minute. We can go out here and just like we did in core, actually, we're already doing it. So core knows about our enemy prefab. So let's go to our core script. Oh, that was from when we were spawning them. Okay, so core knows about our current player and he gets set by set player. We're also going to teach core how to know about our current enemy. Again, presuming we only have one enemy in our little game we have right now. So we'll have a function to set the enemy, and we'll set core dot current enemy equal to E. So that means at some point in time, somebody needs to let our singleton know about the enemy. Well, who knows about the enemy? Our box script does. Remember our box script? He was the guy that instantiated our enemy. So as soon as this enemy is born here, we can go ahead and say core dot set enemy equal to this dot the enemy. So our box script, which is attached to our enemy, he creates an instance of enemy when he first starts, and then he lets that singleton know about that instance. So our singleton now has knowledge of that enemy. Now we did set that enemy up as private. So if we're going to have a set enemy and we want somebody else to be able to get the enemy, we need to give ourselves a get enemy similar to get player. We'll do a public static enemy get get enemy. And this guy will return core dot current enemy. Okay, so now our singleton knows how to set an enemy as well as get an enemy. So inside of our room trigger now, if the thing that just collided with us is an enemy, we're going to take this room, we're going to set the enemy equal to core dot get enemy. Our singleton is the dude who knows about that entity, that enemy. So when a room sets his enemy, what happens? That room remembers the enemy that's currently in the room, overwrites null with the enemy, and then also lets that enemy know about the room, lets the enemy know about themselves. So inside of enemy, they get a set room where they now know what room they're in. And that happens every single time an enemy goes into a, hits one of those room triggers. All right, so now our game should have rooms knowing about any player or any enemy that's currently in them. And it should also know about, and then the players and enemies should know what current room they're in. Go ahead and hit play on this dude. So there's our enemy moving around. I'll hit console here so we see, oh, what's this guy complaining about?
No reference.
Moment. This was the same thing we had last time. So in our set enemy inside of room line 19, when we set so inside of set enemy, this line, it's saying that the enemy is currently equal to null. So this line, it's currently a null. And I think what we did last time to fix that is in our box script, the guy who creates our enemy, we made sure we instantiated the enemy up here. I mentioned that it's kind of a race condition where there's a difference between when this script first exists and when the script first starts. So seemingly what's happening there is that we're trying to set the enemy before the enemy has actually been instantiated. Now he should be instantiated up here since I'm doing it before it started. All right, so now it's seemingly happy again. Players moving from room to room. Oh, I'm gonna do my cheat thing. All right, guy's chasing me. Yeah, so now he's trying to get to, oh, he's stuck. He's bouncing off those walls. Bad AI. There we go. Now he's got me. All right. So in any case, now our player and our enemy know about what rooms they are currently in. And, you know, again, that is an interesting problem that we just solved, because we do need to consider that there is a time gap between a physical time gap between when this line occurs and this line happens. Because this start function is a function that gets called once a script actually starts running. Not once it's been first created. When it's been first created, all this stuff happens. But then when he actually gets, you know, the car turns on, if you will, that's when this function then gets called by the Unity game loop. So we were trying to add a enemy to core. Let's see, where was it coming from? It was coming from room, right? We were trying to set an enemy in room. This guy, we were passing a null value in here, which was setting this dot the enemy equal to null, which is allowed. That's what his default value was anyways. But then this line is where he was freaking out, because we were trying to tell a null value to set the room to this particular room. We didn't actually have an enemy yet because he hadn't technically been created yet, just because of the order in which those start functions have been called. So kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind, that sometimes, you know, in operating systems, we would call that a race condition. So if you need to make sure things exist right at the beginning, instantiate them ahead of start. There might actually be a, let me actually just peek at that real quick. There might actually be a function called like void create or something like that. That's why it's on my mind. Let's just look it up. This is similar to Android development, where there's typically multiple like entry points into like the life cycle of an activity in Android. So in this case, it would be the life cycle of a mono behavior. Unity life cycle. Like an on create. I was just saying, why is it missing an on create event? All right, there is one called awake. But it's private, so. Well, private can be called by, well, no, it can only be called by the script itself. That's not gonna work well. Looks like some other folks think that's a problem as well. Yeah, this is what we're using right now as this mono behavior start, but this doesn't actually happen until yeah, so this is calling this awake method, but this is oh, they are showing this as not necessarily being private. So I let it build it itself. Let me just go on to private off of this. See if it will not yell at us. And this is, we'll just do a print. Room trigger is awake. And let's put like a whole bunch of asterisks before it and after it. That'll help us see it real quick in our console. Let's just make sure this guy's automatically getting called before I sell you a bag of lies about it. So let me clear this, run this. Yep, it's getting called. So every single one of those room triggers had its awake function called. And that awake function, so if we go back here. So this is in our room trigger script. This awake function was called before our start function. And I'll prove that here. So we'll also print out when they've started. All right, so we notice they're all awake. And then they start. Every single one of them was awake before any of them started. Okay, so awake is happening. It's kind of what I was saying. I think it would be sufficient for accomplishing what I was trying to accomplish before. Where was I doing it? Inside of my box script. Yeah, I was doing it in box script. So if we put awake in here, and instead we still had our enemy, but we said this dot the enemy is equal to a new enemy. If we instantiated our enemy inside of awake instead of up here, but not in start, this should still work now for us. No errors. We had a non-null object when we started adding it to stuff because we did the add as soon as the script was awake, which I'm translating into meaning as soon as it was created, but before it started. All right. So kind of an important differentiation for us to consider about the life cycle of a mono behavior, because we might need to do things at different points in time when that behavior comes to life. All right. So in any case, something along those lines for the homework assignment to make the map know about where the player is and where the enemy is, and for those guys to know about what room they're currently in as well. Okay, so let me go ahead. Let me save everything here and make sure everything's saved in here, and I'll push this guy. Yep, go ahead.
Did you say that the like instantiated enemy should not be able to know where the rooms are since we only have one enemy? Because for me, if I still do the like instantiate like 5 or like 5 more enemies from the random or from the spawn point, they also know about the room. So is that like wrong?
No, I mean that's okay. So if you have a whole bunch of enemies, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a whole bunch of enemies, that would probably be like a more advanced version of what we have here. So if you have 5 enemies, then maybe each of those enemies should know about what room they're in. But the problem with the way I have it written right now is, let's assume that 3 of those enemies are all in the same room. Only the last enemy who entered my room, the room would only know about him, because I'm only holding a single enemy in my rooms. If I wanted to fix that, I would have to go into my rooms here. And instead of a room holding a single enemy, I'd have to make that a collection, like a list of enemies.
Okay.
Then I can add them to that list of enemies for that room.
Okay, so the room itself can only remember one enemy at a time, even if I have spawned more.
Yeah, it's going to be
Okay.
whichever of those enemies called this function last.
Okay.
He's going to be the one who finds out who the room will remember, but all of your enemies will know about the room they're in.
Okay.
All of them did get this one called, but only the last guy was able to sneak in his name into this room's enemy slot. That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
And either way is fine for the homework assignment. It sounds like if you had multiple enemies, but you wrote it kind of like this way and you didn't do a list, then your enemies have more information than your room does. And that's okay. You still accomplished the room knowing about an enemy aspect of the assignments. That's fine. Okay, so let me go ahead and push this. They made changes for rooms knowing about enemies. Commit that. And we'll push that to origin. Now, I did get a message before class today. I know it sounds like a couple of you are having some GitHub issues. And they mentioned that there was something wrong with Git Desktop's Unity git ignore file. I don't think I've had that issue. I mean, they mentioned that the size of the repository is like 250 megabytes on GitHub. So is there a way for me to see the size of my repository conveniently? Anybody know how to see how big your repository is easily? guess I can just download a zip and then look at how big the zip is. That's a pretty big file, they're right. So even though only because that was, I mean, it wasn't 250, but it was, 193 or something like that. Although I do have, so actually I'm still not convinced, because inside of my project right now, I have them hidden from you. Let me just collapse a bunch of these things. I have several things that are part of the, like, I have some high definition graphic stuff that I put in here for kind of where we're eventually going to get to. We might not have time, but so I'm uploading some fairly high resolution game objects as part of my project, even though they're not showing up in my scene. So another one. That's not them. Maybe something under assets. Oh yeah, I have like these. I have animations and these mini legion foot soldiers, and that I was going to use for enemies and stuff like that. So I mean, I think most of that's graphics. So I'm not getting that big of a repository at all. So it's just kind of a. But in any case, if some of you are getting too large of a repository and somebody has a fix for it, feel free to post that. In the meantime, if you're having issues with your GitHub, as a worst case, I mean, ideally we get them fixed, but as a worst case, just zip up your scripts folder and submit that for your homework assignment, so I can just see that. Okay. So now, let's see, what do I want to do next here? Remind myself what core knows about. Does core know about all my rooms? I have a list of my room game objects, and they are getting added. If I go back to my prefabs for room, yeah, my room has a room script. This is rolling back several classes here. So I have this thing called a room script that we haven't touched for a while. And this room script adds to core a game object. The game object associated with this entire prefab. All right. And what I want to do here, and for time, we're going to go ahead and say, when the enemy gets to a player, or when a player gets to an enemy, if we collided with an enemy, we're going to go ahead and we're going to, well, for time here, I'm just going to do it real quick at the beginning of public static void destroy room. We're gonna say core dot the room goes dot say bucket 0. So we'll allow us to ask for in this case, it'll be the very first room from our room game objects. And then what we're going to go ahead and do just for time here. I think we need to do it down here. My player script. We're going to say core dot get room. Make sure this does what I think it should do. What I'm expecting here is that as soon as a player and a enemy hit each other, whatever is room 0 should disappear. Yep. Okay. So if you notice, this room disappeared. All right. So what we want to have happen for our homework. So I've given you the code for that. It's going to make this game a little bit more fun because it's going to reduce the number of places we can run. Homework. After a player or enemy leaves a room, make that room, let's just say, destroy that room so that our map gets smaller and smaller as everyone moves around. Submit the GitHub link and the self-assessment. All right, so as you're playing, and I'll push this last thing just so you see the example of the destroy. Right now, my code only core exposes only the very first room game object we ever added. So right now, only room 0 ever disappears, regardless of what room the enemies and stuff left. And I'm doing that the very first time that a player and an enemy collide with each other inside of on collision enter for player script. I'm destroying whatever game object we just got from core. All right, so the idea is that our map should keep getting smaller and smaller, less places to run to because we're destroying those game objects. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. All right, I'll see everybody on Wednesday. And I guess look to Slack for confirmation of whether we're in person or Slack only. Or I'm sorry, or Zoom only. I'm hoping to get back in person as soon as possible, but I want to play that day to day at this point.